We're happy everyone's able to join us here today to close out this session. We've had great days, day 1 through 3. We just kind of want to do a recap for anyone who may be newly participating, or just to kind of recap and orient you all to what we've discussed so far today, or the past 3 weeks, 4 weeks around virtual public involvement. So thank you, Kevin, kind of throwing the agenda up front. And I just kind of want to circle back to some of the, I guess, a few of the key takeaways that I came across from, days 1 through 3. Kevin's kind of pulled up the polls, information, key takeaways that we provided for day 1. And so we can kind of see just from, my recollection, we opened up with giving you all a broad understanding of virtual public involvement. We had a state DOT roundtable. We heard some awesome tools and techniques from our state DOT partners. They've been updating us a little bit about how they've used VPI. And these are a few of the responses that you all provided for key takeaways from day 1. So we see a few of the ones that are popping up to the top are, regarding the agencies being able to utilize a variety of different outreach efforts, but still, finding out a way to make sure that they're their ways are effective and their individual efforts are effective. And then the fact that we have a great set of VPI tools that we mentioned and referenced, and we've sent out emails and summary information after each day as a takeaway. And then that's something else that I took down note of, is that Mass DOT, that 100 series training, a good way of training to help staff and public understand virtual public involvement, how to use virtual public involvement. And there's many ways to accomplish virtual public involvement. But those are the few takeaways from day 1. Did I miss anything? Anything that came to anyone's mind regarding day 1?
I think that's a good summary, Mac.
All right. How about day 2? So day 2 was a great day as well. The thing that caught my attention. So we had a good discussion on virtual public involvement and equitable access to the decision-making process. So we had a great presentation from Carolyn Nelson. We also had some key takeaways regarding advertise at the transfer station and dump. So yeah, I remember that one. I think that one was a key takeaway that a lot of people highlighted. Non-traditional outreach methods, going to where the public is to advertise for public meetings, public hearings. And the fact that we have to customize our outreach efforts based on the population that we're reaching out to. We also went over a few hybrid approaches to public meetings. And we also had our MPO, RPO, COG roundtable presentation where we heard from a few different RPOs about how they've implemented VPI within their jurisdictions. And then as far as day 3, a topic that I feel strongly about, visualization. So we had a great presentation from Jim regarding visualization and interactive use of breakout rooms from Zach do-it-yourself videos. But again, we had a good variety of different presentation and information presented to show how important and the benefits of using visualizations. And I think we had a great breakout session where we were able to run through our various groups of how we could reasonably put together a do-it-yourself video, using visualization techniques. And we've heard from a few different groups about the different products that they could produce using a visualization technique. And of course, our tagline, just do it, just get started. So I think that was something good to finish that day on. Just sometimes all we have to do is just take some action and get started with producing our visualization technique. And then, you know, understanding that visualizations don't necessarily take a lot of time and resources to produce. And there's lots of different resources and tools that help us produce those visualizations. And really, you know, we talked about story, you know, telling a story. You know, these videos and visualization techniques can be very beneficial in telling the story, either the project or the program, or how the story that we want to convey as it relates to virtual public involvement. Is there anything else that I missed from our takeaways, either from day 1 or day 3, that anyone wants to offer up? Anything additional? Anything that we missed?
Maybe just to add a couple of things from my perspective, I think, you know, something that's kind of come up throughout is that, you know, virtual public involvement isn't necessarily something that's intended to replace in-person public involvement, and that, you know, it's just another one of the tools in our toolbox that helps us expand our reach and, you know, meet the needs of different community members. Yeah, and that, you know, we often use the phrase, you know, meet people where they are, and that, you know, normally applies to the in-person meetings, but I think we kind of had the realization that that can also apply to virtual public involvement, because increasingly people are online. So if we want to meet people where we are, we also have to be online, but that we shouldn't be necessarily thinking about just, you know, replacing our tried and true traditional techniques, but supplementing and enhancing those by using virtual public involvement tools.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Anyone else? Any additional items that we may have missed or overlooked, or anything that you want to highlight that you took away from either day 1 through 3? Yeah, and I think, and even through the, you know, the visualization presentation, I think it was so much effective understanding and seeing how you can go from a, you know, a 2D black and white image to even just by adding color, can do so much for visualization and helping people understand what a potential project could look like. So I think that was something that, you know, like I said, you know, I'm big on visualization, so day 3 was great for me, being able to see the effective use of the tools and how we're able to visualize projects in the program. Any other takeaways before we kind of get started going into day 4? So I'll kind of give a brief background of day 4, introduction of day 4. So we're going to be having our State DOT NPO showcase regarding the institutionalizing the virtual public involvement. And I guess kind of the key thing we wanted to orient you all before we get into day 4 is, you know, we've had, based on our EDC reports, we've had many states that have moved from the assessing or demonstration stage into institutionalizing virtual public involvement. And just really through the course of the, you know, the pandemic, we're understanding that a lot of these states, you know, they've used some of these tools previously, but now that, you know, we've had time to use these tools and techniques and implement a lot of these virtual public involvement techniques, they're becoming institutionalized. When we say institutionalized, we mean they're being written into policy or programs or the public involvement plan for how the NPO or how the DOT wishes to utilize virtual public involvement throughout their program. And so we're here a little bit from a few of our agencies, you know, Mass DOT, New Hampshire DOT, and Maine DOT, regarding how they've institutionalized virtual public involvement. And then we'll get into another, after the break, we'll get into another detailed discussion regarding the institutionalizing virtual public involvement. Any questions before we get started? All right. So without further ado,
Let me just check with Scott Rollins. Scott, are you ready with your presentation?
I'm good to go. I'll just need to get it shared up and give me the go ahead. Sure.
All right. So why don't you go ahead and cue that up? And while Scott's doing that, just as a reminder, we do have some time if you're an MPO, RPO, or COG participant who'd like to contribute some thoughts or examples of your own to these presentations about what your agency is doing to institutionalize the use of VPI. Please just put a little message in the chat or raise your hand when we call, offer up the time. So without any further ado, Scott.
All right, thanks, Lana. I'll get going. Oh, that's going on its own. Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about some of our previous tools and then some of the new updated tools, of course, during the pandemic, and some of the previous tools that are going to carry on. So we have done visualizations and videos, so I want to step back a little bit and show some of those. We've used the turning point clickers. I'll show a little bit with that, and certainly our website and social media, which we've really ramped up a lot more recently. So some of the visualizations we did really range from a low to a high cost, like was talked about last week, a low to high effort, and the choice really depends on the project needs. And I'm kind of lumping visualizations and videos together just for the sake of this, because some of the visualizations are videos, and then some of the videos that we have done again kind of fall into that same gamut of how they range. So here's one that kind of was the Cadillac, or maybe call it the Tesla now version, where we worked with our designer. They actually had a sub-consultant, and you could actually see what the new bridge would look like. You could actually show the old bridge beside it, go through based on the plans, based on information that we gave them of what we wanted. And this was really good, working with the design advisory committee on some of the different amenities and being able to actually show them what they looked like. So this is really a very basic visualization, and we did this for a diverging diamond interchange that we were proposing, and this was really through the planning phase. And we went up and talked to both the city council and also had a public meeting throughout the planning phase to kind of talk that over. And when you look at this visualization and you realize people realize they're driving on the other side of the road, that could actually scare people and, make it even worse for you, maybe, that they're like, I don't want to do that. So what we did is we used the turning point clickers for this too. So this is another part of tying them in with the visualization with that in-person meeting. And what we did is we asked a question of, what's your opinion of that proposed DDI? And this was fairly early on in the presentation. You can see we still had a lot of people that were favorable to it. I think they might have heard a little bit about it, but you had some people that were neutral or just not as favorable. So then we went through, and I'll run these videos real quick. Should be sound with these, hopefully. And I'm not sure if you'll hear me over this, but just kind of showing the traffic, showing how the patterns would be. This helped people to understand a little bit. And I'll move to the next video, maybe. Okay.
Scott, the sound doesn't seem to be coming through. Could you just describe for us briefly what the actual audio would be saying?
Sure. Actually, we had one of our staff people that went through and talked about how you would drive the video and how you would drive the video, how you would drive the DDI and go through and do that. And she had a really good speaking voice and very calm, so we felt that was really beneficial to do. And this one kind of showed them side by side. And then for some reason, I'm not being able to, okay, let me go to the next slide here. Okay, technical difficulties. Sorry, let me get out and go back here.
When you come back in and share your screen, there should be a little toggle that for sharing your computer audio. That might help.
I failed to do that. Okay. All right, so let me get on to the second video.
Hogan Road eastbound traffic goes through the first crossover and uses the leftmost lane to turn onto I-95 northbound. Here you are heading east on Hogan Road. You continue straight past the southbound on-ramp on your right and approach the first crossover. When the light turns green, you continue through the crossover where you were.
So that just showed really, people how to drive that, and it really helped them to get a good idea of how to do that. And for some reason, I'm going to try to go back, go forward.
Guided to the left side of the road. To make the left turn, Hogan Road eastbound traffic
All right, let me go back here. This worked earlier today for me, and of course now these are why live things can be an issue. Okay, so what we did then after that is asked again your opinion of the DDI with the clicker. So one vote, one person. And you can see we moved the dial, and that measurement that more people went over to the strongly agree. We had people leave from the neutral and go over to that. And this kind of just shows those two slides superimposed of the white was what people originally thought. And you can see how more people strongly agreed as we went on. So it's really good. Those clickers were a good way of getting some measurement to that. And we're going to be doing, this was the planning phase of the DDI. The DDI will be coming up as a project, so we'll be able to utilize those videos in our on-demand process. So moving on, the website and social media, I'm not going to talk too much about that right now. That's really more involved in our new tool, so I'll talk about it there, but we've really ramped up the website and social media aspects. So our new tools, and really the big thing is the on-demand process that we've been utilizing. And some of the different tools to help with that are Microsoft Teams, notices how we put them out. We've just updated and come up with a flyer. We've updated a public involvement plan, and then really the brains of it is a public involvement management application, or Pima. So this is our page when you first go on to our virtual public involvement site, and all of our Facebook ads, all of our information notices drive people to this site, and then they can go down and see the different meetings that are there. So here's the video. Let me show another video real quickly. This is what people will see on that site that really does a real good description of our process. And this is kind of one of those well done videos. Our creative services folks did it, and it's really well done compared to when we do our projects. We do them ourselves and really low cost, low effort, but this was done very well.
There's no audio.
Oh, sorry. Let me reshare this. Put on my audio.
Virtual public involvement. Hello and welcome. My name is Jennifer Brickett, and I'm the Director of the Bureau of Planning at the Maine Department of Transportation. And welcome. My name is Jennifer Brickett, and I'm the Director of the Bureau of Planning at the Maine Department of Transportation. This virtual public involvement page is where you can find out more information about Maine DOT projects, ask questions, and provide valuable feedback to the department. Virtual public involvement is redefining the way we interact with the public. For decades, our project managers would drive out to cities and towns to hold in-person public meetings. Those meetings usually happened in the evening, lasted around 2 hours, and only attracted a small number of people. In 2019, Maine DOT started exploring virtual public involvement options as a way to reach more people and get more feedback. This new approach also has the added benefit of saving the
Well, for whatever reason, it wanted to cut that out, but it went into a little more description. Jen went into a little bit more just description of what we're doing. But you could see kind of how that video was well done and to give people an understanding of what our process is. So I'll keep moving on. So the on-demand benefits are so you don't have glitches like I've just had. That's one reason we decided to go with the on-demand. It's really good for limited connectivity. If you have people that might have issues, they can go on, they can view it. If they have a problem, they can go back to it and view it at any time, anywhere. Really big important thing for us is we can control that message. We put out the video, we put out that information we want. We have that single web page that shows people where to go. And this is actually showing the our notice that we do and also a Facebook ad that we've utilized. So you can see we direct people to that VPI site, getting them there, a good way to get people engaged. Facebook has really helped out a lot. We also recently came up with a flyer, and this flyer, the plan is to get this out to public places, including transfer stations and dumps. One thing we heard last time. And it's just another way to increase engagement. And this we can really get the crowd to with the smartphones. They can just, if they're in a library, wherever, they can take a picture of it. That QR code will bring them right to our VPI page. So here's just showing another way, showing some measurements of this, and I got some examples of a few different projects. This is one in Searsport, and the impressions is the number of times it was shown on Facebook. The reach is kind of the number of unique users on Facebook that actually saw this in their feed. Then you see how many people clicked to that VPI page, how many attendees, how many stakeholders, where stakeholders and attendees are the same in this, and how many people actually did a written comment into the Pima system for us. This I think was $150 and had a reach of around 10 square miles. So we can determine where we want to reach, how far with what we do with that. Here's another one, similar, quite a few impressions, the reach drops down, and you just see how those funnel down. But some of these smaller projects, we're getting a lot of people that are actually attending these meetings, commenting on these. We can actually see the data too of how long people have stayed on the videos. So we're trying to make sure we do short videos. So we retain them, and we're getting a pretty good retaining of people watching most or a good portion of the video. Here's a different one that is under construction now. We're going to close the interstate for this, so we've really tried to push this out quite a bit. We did a Facebook ad for the whole state and really focused on the communities around there. You can see just how many people. We've actually got more stakeholders here because we added people. We can import email distribution lists. So we had 240 people that actually went to the site on their own. And we had a bunch of others, a little over 200, that we've actually added so that they're in that page. And when I send out an email, I will hit all of them with one email to give them project updates. And you can see how many have commented. So we use Microsoft Teams to really just help us show all the how-to documents, different chats. We've got different channels. We've got over 100 team members in the department that are part of that team that see all the information that goes in there. And it's really kind of our informal training area. We don't have an official training per se like Massachusetts, but it's kind of informally how we train people and get them to understand what's going on. And here's just a view of it, and you can see the virtual public involvement team, and we've got the different channels for some of the different tools that we utilize, and you can see the chat. We also have where we put the files. We have one folder that's really important of creating a virtual meeting, and this just shows a little bit more of what's in that meeting, some of the different files in there. Here's just an example of one of those files, our quick start guide to create a virtual meeting, and just has links to the other documents, so we can go through, a project manager can go through and see what they need to do to get that meeting started and to move on and get everything done. And here's just kind of the second pages of that, just going through, giving some examples, showing screenshots of how we do certain things. So our public involvement plan, we have institutionalized virtual public involvement. Our PIP was updated in March of this year, and it does include VPI being institutionalized. Here's just a few pages showing some of the different aspects. There's a whole section on the public involvement tools, including VPI information, just a couple pages showing some of the different tools and techniques that we've talked about today. One important part is that we talked about doing these meetings, but even after the pandemic, and we can go back out, we will still continue to do these, but we may supplement with a live meeting. So the Pima application, like I said, that's really the brains of the whole system of how it all ties in. It's web-based, not connected to our servers. We can go in, we get the comments from people that go to the meeting, they go right into that application. We can then respond, we can see the data, we can have multiple events and just continue that interaction. Like I said, we can email all the stakeholders with project updates or other information. Kind of a real brief showing what the public would see when they go onto that page and the different videos. So now I'm going to get out of this and do just a quick live demo in Pima, go into that site. So let me unshare. Go to you guys hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
All right, so here's a page when you first sign into Pima. And if I don't click on a project, it will show all the different projects down below that whatever I'm on. But going back up to the top, here's where I can go in and edit. I can favorite a project over here on the left. I can see real quick snapshot when I'm looking through these different projects, how many comments have come into different projects in this column. I can see the stakeholders for the different projects, the different meetings, and we have a desktop and a mobile version, so it will actually show as 2 for that. And we can see the favorability rating of when people go on, they can say how favorable the project. So we have a metric here of that. And we also have over 100 people that can go in and read this. You know, managers, supervisors can go in and just quickly see, oh, okay, we've got a 70% or we've got a 43. You know, what's the reason for that? And we know the reason on some of those for that. But if I click on a project, then I'm going to go down and I will see the comments just attributed to that project. So I can go through, see those, see what people have said. I can click in to the stakeholders and see all of the different stakeholders for that project. You can see this one, I have 434. So there's a lot of people that are interested in this because we're going to be closing down the interstate coming up this fall. So you can go down through, also see some different metrics of the favorability, the comments, response time, some of that information. If I can also go in, and if people have put on the map where their comment is attributed to, I can see that and see where they're saying, I've got a concern or my comment is attributed to this area. So that's just another interesting thing we can see. We can go through, we can export, we can email all the stakeholders and send them information if there's something we want to send out. Here's where you can do that. So there's a lot of information here, and we're still just kind of, scratching the surface on a lot of what we can do. But there's just a lot of information here. You can look by, all of the different projects. I can just click on my projects or go through and see information for everything. When I click on my projects, if I hit the envelope, I will then get an actual email when a comment comes in. So I don't have to go into the system to look at it and keep looking for information coming in. I can get an email of that. So I'm going to pause right now and just see if folks have any questions or want to see any more about Pima or any other aspect.
Scott, this is Lana. How do you manage access to Pima within
Yeah.
Maine DOT?
So I can go click here, click on admin, and I can add a new user. And I can go in, add that user, put in their name. I just need their name, their email, and you can see the different users we've got here throughout the department and our consultants. And I can give them whatever access I want to give them. And a good portion, other than the project managers and some of the management staff, have only read-only access. So they can go in, see that information, see what's there, and then maybe talk to the project manager. There's also, we haven't utilized as much, a response type that I can ask for help from other people on the team, and through a response type system we haven't utilized yet. But that's how I can do that, and go in and make that change or addition.
And what has been the reception amongst your own staff to using Pima now?
It's been good. We were wondering how, with having to go in and make comments and respond. I'll unshare now so I can see you guys. But it really hasn't been that bad. And the good thing is that we see the comment, we have a little time to be able to respond to it. So as opposed to standing up in front of 50 people, and you might feel like you have to say something and maybe that's not quite the accurate thing, or you forget to get back, you might say to someone, "Oh, I'll get back to you," and you have nothing there staring you in the face. Here it's staring you in the face of that comment. So you need to go through and respond to that. If we've waited so long and we haven't commented, it shows up as kind of a flag that there's a comment out there that needs to be made. So it just gives us that opportunity to take a little time and again control the message. We've controlled the message with the on-demand. We can control the message of when we respond back to them too, so we don't say something that we might regret. And it's out there. Anyone who has read access can go and see anything I've commented on or other project managers have commented on, and those responses. And one thing we do also is, once a comment period is over, we'll post them on our library page, and we'll actually post the questions and the comments so that people can see that at a later time and go on and see that. We'll scrub any personal information, but we'll post those too. So
I do have an additional question, but I wanted to invite any of the other participants also. You can raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask a question, or put your question into the chat pod. We're monitoring that as well. So Scott, I know that, and Derek, or rather Andrea, is going to be going next with the Massachusetts DOT presentation. And I know MassDOT has plans for certain enhancements to the Pima tool. So my question for you is, based on where Maine DOT is headed in its use of VPI, what additional, what's on your wish list in terms of features or platforms and tools and things like that? Are those things, and this is getting to be a long question, but 3 parts.
Mm-hmm.
Are those things that you see yourselves adding on to Pima, or looking for other tools to sort of add to your tool set?
Mm-hmm. In regards to Pima, there's a consortium, and this is all thanks to Iowa DOT. Iowa DOT got this set up going, and they provide the software free, and it's really just working with the consultant to get us set up and learning the software. But that software is out there, and the states, if they choose to, they do an MOA with Iowa DOT, and then any changes that are made, any updates, we all get. So, and we have a consortium that we've just started meeting to go over, wish lists and certain things. So there's things, if Mass DOT comes up with something and we think, wow, that's going to benefit us, everyone as part of that consortium will get that. So that's one good thing. And there are a few things coming. I think the Reach app was a portion. The integration with ArcGIS was something right after we came on. So there's certain updates that are happening. And I think it's important too to say that, Pima is really where you're getting the commenting, the responding, but there's a lot of information outside of Pima that the public sees, and that's, where we put our videos, we put our information, our documents, or you know, when you go live and bring the clickers or whatever. So there's so many things. It's not just Pima, but there's a lot of different aspects that you can add, and, you know, put different visualizations when you're doing that meeting. I hope that answered well.
Yeah. So I see Lucy has her hand raised. Go ahead, Lucy.
Scott, I had a question. You worked with Iowa and the consultants. What was the time frame for you, Maine, to develop this? Was it like, did it take 2 months? Did it take, how much effort was it on staff that's there already? Or, you said you hired a consultant. So, time frame and all of that.
We made the decision, I think, in mid-March, and our first meeting went live June 30th of last year. So it was pretty quick to get up and running. And certainly, you know, we've up, and a lot of that was work we were doing of, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to set this up? You know, you could just set up a project or two. And that was one thing we were going to do. Pre-pandemic, we were actually, the whole intent of this peer exchange was from us to learn from SDOT about Pima, and we were going to do it on maybe a few projects. Well, as we all know, things changed, and we did it for everything. But, you know, you could do on one project and it'd be a very minimal to maybe set something up for that. But we were setting something up for everything. But it was very quick to be able to, you know, once we made that decision and push forward.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any more questions for Scott on what Maine DOT is doing or planning to do in terms of their use of VPI?
I had a quick question. So for the Pima tool on the public's end, do you know how they interact in terms of like when they make a comment and you all respond? Do they get an email saying that you all responded, or do they have to go back into the system?
So they do get an email, Mac, and originally when they make a comment, there's kind of a canned email of, you know, thank you, and someone will be getting back to you shortly. And then when we go in and we go actually into the system and respond, and we can click save changes and make sure everything's right, and then we can click send. And when we click send, that will send that off to an email immediately to them. And when they sign in, they put in their name, their zip code, so we know where they're from, and their email. So their email is there. So that clicking send sends it right to their email. And there are some of these where we actually have kind of a chain of comments where you might respond, they have another question, and it's right in the tool, and we email again, back another response. So when I look in the Pima system, I see those back and forth. They're going to see them as emails, separate emails to them from us.
And just kind of maybe a follow-up last question. So have you all used, I guess, the data and the information that comes out of that to support your decisions and projects, like to show like the record of public comments and how you all responded to them? Have you all used that to support any of like your administrative record for projects?
I mean, really what it is it's helping us to get information and, you know, to help make it better decisions, and also, you know, and also to inform the public of the project. So depending on a comment, you know, a lot of them are questions that we answer and tell them about the project. And sometimes it might be, oh, by the way, there's, you know, an endangered species here. I mean, that's not an example, but if there's information that we will gather from them that will help us make a decision, most definitely.
Okay, good, thank you.
So Kevin, did you have a comment? And this will be the last one before we turn it over to Andrea.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Scott, I think you talked about this a little bit, but I'm just kind of curious, you know, and I know it's still relatively new for you, but have you heard from others within the department about kind of how using Pima affects their workflows? You know, is this something that really makes managing the public input and comment process a lot easier for your organization, or is it something that's kind of a learning curve that people are still dealing with, or any thoughts about kind of, I guess in particular, people who kind of don't work in planning and environment but have to interact with projects, you know, how do they view the Pima system?
Yeah, it's Kevin, it's typically our project managers who are going in and responding back. And if we need to, you know, we'll go to the environmental person or whoever else. They can go in and see those comments too, and they could sign up to actually get the emails also. But pretty much it's the project manager and then coordinating with others to, you know, help make that better comment. you know, that is one thing. It adds more time. It adds a little more time to be able, you know, to go in, review those, and respond to those comments. Excuse me, but it's not a huge amount of time, and the upside is way better than the downside. You know, I remember in the past, you know, waiting, you know, weeks to get the transcript, and then reading through the transcript. Now, I can't think of anything worse than reading through a transcript, you know, 100-page transcript of a meeting you were at. But to get to like, oh yeah, I remember this, and get that additional information, and then, oh, I forgot to go respond to them. I better, you know, do that now. Here, you know, it's immediate that we get those comments and then we can respond right back. So it's not a large period of time to do that. And we can also take, if someone calls us and responds to us the old-fashioned way, we can then upload that information into Pima, so that comment is there too, and it's captured forever. You know, we have that. When a project's done, we can archive this and archive that information, go into our, you know, where we save all our information, so it's there, as opposed to, you know, phone calls or things that may never make it into any type of, you know, a written system.
Great. Yeah, no, I can imagine having that centralized place to keep the records for everything be tremendously helpful. You know, particularly if you're working in a NEPA process, but even if you're not, you know, just having that comprehensive record of what everybody heard through all the different interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with NEPA, where you need to actually have that record. You know, most of our projects right now aren't ones that have needed that type of NEPA record to be captured.
All right, thank you so much, Scott. And now, if Andrea, you're ready, we'll hear all about what Massachusetts DOT has been doing.
I am ready. I'm going to have Derek kick it off, and then I will share my screen.
Awesome. Sounds good. Can folks hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, so thanks, Lana and the team for having us present here today and throughout the peer exchange. On day one, we talked a lot about sort of the training and other tools that we have available at MassDOT for project managers. Just to sort of bounce off the last presentation, we are working on a process to centralize all of our public feedback and integrate Pima within existing tools and do a lot of that, but that's still very much in the works. We wanted to highlight, as part of the presentation today, for institutionalizing VPI, a lot of the training materials we've produced and some of the organizational restructuring we've done, and touch on some of the checklists and SOPs that are in the works. So sort of more on the, I guess, sort of workforce strategy / sort of background, behind the scenes type stuff that we thought might be of interest. We heard a lot of positive feedback on the training program that Andrea has been really instrumental in leading at MassDOT, along with Alex Cantor from our IT department, who I believe is on and available for questions as well. So we wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive on that component of our VPI initiative, and that would be of interest to folks and good to highlight. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Andrea to give our presentation.
Great. Thanks, Derek. I just want to amplify on what Derek said, because of so many questions around Pima, because it's not just exclusive to Pima. I think there are three basic elements right now that are the forces behind how we approach VPI today and going forward. And the first is really just staying on top of all of the changes in technology and translating them to the PMs. And so you'll see why that's important as we go through the presentation on the training today. But that's technology is changing rapidly, and what we're trying to do is a simplified approach and make it easier for the public to enter into our meetings and engage. And with so many new things coming online and so many changes to the things we come online, we find that to be a lot of effort and energy, and it's worth it, but it's important. The second piece is the accessibility. The accessibility of the platforms, the accessibility of the tools and techniques. So every time we do a video, every time we do, graphics on our presentations, we have to do an accessibility review of those. And it's incredibly expensive, but it's important because, again, we're trying to make sure that the material we're providing to the public is usable. So the accessibility piece is another undercurrent that in our efforts. And the last one, and Derek just mentioned this, is data management and integration. And we are integrating a lot of our tools into our database. We're actually using Salesforce. I'm not going to get into that today. and Pima is becoming integrated into that. But it's a huge effort, and it's going to require training of data management people. We're still stymied by what can we actually take from the public, and we're also stymied by lack of public trust and wanting to give us information, and that impacts our ability to hit the underserved. So I did want to start with those three things. We hadn't actually thought of talking about that, but having just heard the recent presentation and some of the questions, I thought that would be important for you all to understand, as just that is that's the forces behind all of our efforts. So just to begin, I'm going to talk really fast because of the time limit, but everyone can have access to it. So these slide decks. So I put a lot more information in here that you can read at your pleasure. But again, I think for the first thing is that what we have found as a motivating principle is that we needed to be very uniform and consistent in how our VPI activities and our training were going. And it's not just highway. We have transit, rail and transit. We have planning. We have a number of departments that are all interfacing. We have the RMV, the Registry of Motor Vehicles, all interfacing with the public. So we're just trying to make sure that all of them are using the same tools and understanding how to use them. So for the public, it's easy to go from one mode to the other. Our outreach and training has been primarily targeted on our project managers, producers, and facilitators, and our third parties. I'll get into that. But again, our efforts are rooted in lowering the bar for public entry. Whatever we put out there has to be very easy to use. The techniques and tools that we use are all focused on eliminating barriers. That's everything from partnering to using CART type of interpreters we use on our techniques. And then the other thing, which we'll get into a little bit more today, was how we're formalizing this process, and in terms of the training and SOPs and brand messaging as well. But again, staying on top of the changes is our biggest challenge. One thing that has come to be really clear to us as we work with our project managers and the public is the distinction between a meeting and a hearing when it comes to VPI tools, because they're different. And even though we use the same platforms, we have many tools. Hearings are necessary for project submittals and funding, and they require a lot more documentation. They tend to be more informational. Meetings are a lot more dynamic. You know, I think meetings lend themselves to a Pima tool very nicely, but there's also other tools out there that we're using. And we're developing SOPs actually for each one, because we use a webinar for hearings and we use meetings, a Zoom meeting for meetings. And the other thing that we're constantly reminding and retraining our project managers on is public meetings are really there to serve the public. It's not a checklist approach, and it's typically how they've been trained. And that the focus is, since it's not a checklist approach, we really have to understand what barriers are in each locality, and it's not a cookie cutter. They're very different. So that's why the partnering is so very important. We developed a significant, we spent a lot of time working on this checklist of barriers, because I think there are a lot of things that people never really appreciated before, like childcare, or, you know, trust, or cultural barriers. And so we spent a lot of time working through this work chart and coming up with techniques on how to engage. So when they actually developed a plan to approach the public, whether it's a meeting or a hearing, they're cognizant of what their community may be experiencing, and therefore they can adjust their meetings accordingly. We selected Zoom. This was quite the process for us to get Zoom, because we actually weren't state approved for it, and we had to work through getting that approval. But we actually chose Zoom because it was the one most of the public were using on their regular day. They were using it throughout the pandemic, and they're using it for their friend calls, their work calls. And Zoom was actually very easy for us to work with, and I'll get into some of the details of them later. But we actually received Zoom licenses and Zoom webinar licenses, and that's made it real easy for the public to work. And again, these are licenses that are available across all of Mass DOT, all modes. Partners are another thing that we're really focusing our training on, is the very important and valuable results you get from really opening the doors to stronger partnerships. I mean, local partners are our boots on the ground. They understand their communities better than state organizations do. They have better networks. We work with MPOs and RTAs because they have an audience and customers that have specific needs that help us identify how we can work more effectively with them. And of course, we work closely with advocacy and consulting firms. But for us, the partners are really a critical component in helping us reach people that are underserved. What I want to talk about now is the training program, but I felt that was an important precursor because it's the context from which our training is based. So our training has been focusing on two levels: facilitator training and producer training. Facilitators being the ones in the long haul, the ones that actually do a lot of the outreach, mostly a day job. The producer training is usually the one that actually executes the meeting and does a lot of the technology, and Alex is on and he can get through a lot of details with you and answer any question on that. But the producer training is really where we've been bringing a whole team of our own staff on board. So we've used this as an opportunity to actually train our own staff, which allows us to use our consultants to be more creative and not help us with the administration of the project. We have a site at DOT, which is called a Learning Hub. It's absolutely an amazing site. It has trainings, all kinds of trainings on it. And it's also accessible to all modes. So anyone who works for state government can access the Learning Hub. We've made it accessible to our consultants so they can stay on top of what training materials we have and as we refresh the materials. All of our trainees are required to shadow hearings and meetings. We require them to go to a system-wide accessibility meeting so they can understand what it's like to deal with an audience that has myriad of accessibility needs and how that is handled. And then they can get a Zoom license, and then they have to execute a meeting and they have to sign off. And the certification program is really a key component of our virtual training. So this is the schedule that they have to go to. These are the hours that they have to complete. And again, the ending here in this last column is that the PM, when they feel comfortable after shadowing enough, we actually put them with a project manager, and the project manager will actually sign off whether they're ready to be released into the general pool. And then once that happens, then we start assigning them. But this has been a real important component of our training program. Not only do we train the project managers and the consultants about how, troubleshooting techniques, checklists, and they all have that material. We actually felt it was important to train our own staff to help support the project managers and the consultants in execution. So this program has been a critical component of our approach. The certification is really important because we have a number of people that are volunteering to do this, are coming in from all over the agency. And I will tell you, not one of, well, maybe two of them actually have done public meetings before. So they're not actually used to what it's like to deal with the public. And they're certainly not used to what it's like to deal with an angry public. So our training really involves just orienting them and going over all the materials in the Learning Hub, but also what to expect and how to manage a crowd, which again is why Zoom is a great resource for us. The certification is also important for our project managers because we have a rigorous program. And we double check and triple check, and we partner with, we have shadowing, and we have all support systems set up for our trainees as they go through this program. And when they come out and they're certified, all the other project managers are really comfortable pulling these folks from the pool. So we just felt that was important. So there was a base criteria where the project managers could feel really comfortable. And what's really actually happening is that some of our producers are now partnering with project managers and just doing all their meetings with them, which is just a wonderful outcome. The tools and the resources. This is another way of institutionalizing how we're doing this. So there's three basic ways that we are formalizing our trainees and the training program and the support resources for our project managers to execute VPI. And the first one is we actually have meetings every Wednesday morning. We've been doing this since March of 2020, where you have a cross-agency team that's the same team that's been working together for 16 months now. And we're opening the doors to all our trainees to come into those meetings to talk to us about their experiences and to ask us questions, and they get immediate feedback. And we also use that information, and we actually come up with different training materials or different instructions based on what we're hearing from them. And we've heard a wild array of experiences. The second item is that we actually have a VPI email, and this is the way we communicate out, and people can ask for support services to us, and it's how we schedule our producers. And the last piece we have is a dedicated Sharepoint site for internal staff. And this is where we put model videos scripts for what you're supposed to say, advice on how you integrate public officials, because mostly when people sign up for a meeting, you don't actually know they're a public official, and our producers would not. Our PMs would, but our producers would not. So we've come up with instruction on that, and also the latest on Zoom practices. So these three are the everyday resources available for our producers and our project managers. The Learning Hub is always there, but these three are the up-to-date information. We have about 15 checklists to do VPI, and they're all in the training program at the Learning Hub. And it really just for those who are checklist focused, they're a great resource. All of our Learning Hub materials are downloadable. The last thing in the area that we've been really proud of is the MOEs, the measures of effectiveness. We really wanted to come up with a way to allow the public to communicate with us about our tools and to give us ideas on what we might want to think. We don't put a certain platform out there. We don't ask for advice on a certain tool or technique. It's more generic. And these have been wonderful. So there's two ways you can use them. In meetings, we're asking people to use them as polls while you're doing the meetings, so every participant can see actually what everybody's saying. And for hearings, we're asking people to do them as surveys. Zoom just shoots it right out. So it's real simple to do in Zoom. And this is an example of how we do our MOEs. And we've been getting great responses from these. It's actually quite surprising because people are so survey and poll tired. But, people have taken the time to actually say, this is what we find is working and this is not working. And it opens the door for them to use our website and to email us about some other ideas as well. So I think it's a great strategy in helping people feel like they're engaged, and also building a little bit more trust with the public that they can communicate with us in multiple different ways, and that we actually really do care. Institutionalizing. So to wrap this up a little bit, so recruitment and training is about one of our biggest challenges. We actually just got about 5 more volunteers this week, and we're onboarding them tomorrow. But just continuing to train our workforce and have them ready to support project managers is really important. We started a whole piece on brand messaging because it was time to refresh it. And we came up with, a whole new approach on how we send our message, how we communicate about caring. So we've got new flyers, new notices, new presentation deck templates, a lot more public friendly, all been accessibility reviewed, looking great. And people are picking those up, and our consultants all have them. And again, they're on the Learning Hub. So as we change them, they're updated. And before I go to that, so SOPs. So the other thing we're realizing is that in this changing world of regulation, that it's important to make sure our project managers know what the regulations are. So the governor changes his directive, the CDC and does their directive changes. Federal Highway, we're hoping to have more active links with Federal Highway on their changing directives besides what we already have. So that way, our consultants and our producers and our project managers always can go readily to an area and find out what the state of regulations are. That's really important as we go to the hybrid. Oh, and we're finalizing, as I said earlier, the SOPs, one for meetings and one for hearings, and they will include hybrid meetings. So the next steps that we're doing is we're constantly updating the training materials, process improvement. As I said, we're looking to we're considering actually hiring our own staff or training our own staff to actually be facilitators full time. Struggling with reaching the underserved and doing it better, and managing the diversity of new technologies and new tools. And that the database integration is probably one of the most complex ones, because that is really, really challenging to get that all in there and how to get so we're actually collecting. So another reason why we use Zoom is that we own all the data. And so we're trying to collect data from multiple consultants. So as you go from planning to design to construction, your consultants change. And if they're using their own platforms, we don't have those tools and we don't have any place for them to go. So we've really focused a lot on that data integration and trying to figure out how to sort it out and make it usable for both the public and our own team. Hybrid, we're looking at 2 different types of hybrid, and mainly because of the technology. This is a draft. This is not yet done. We've previewed this with our Our internal teams, our managers and supervisors in various departments. We've also previewed it with the consulting community and trying to get their input and also get their statewide experience. I've been previewing this at the national level with TRB and the public engagement committees to try to understand what they're learning, which has been our typical approach to VPI all along, as well as obviously we use the federal highway site because you guys are awesome. But basically we're looking at two different strategies for hybrids. One is a separate and the other is combined. Separate's a lot easier to implement. Oh, and I must preview this. We are pretty clear virtual is here to stay. And we have told all our staff and all our consultants, when there is a post-pandemic, we will still be using virtual. So don't think it's going to disappear because COVID's no longer in the headlines. We will continue to use it. So if you want to do an in-person meeting, you still have to have a virtual component. And so we're outlining that for the staff. And that again is why the SOPs are so important. So people can pull that doc and know exactly how to navigate this changing world, because we will not be releasing VPI from anyone's MO going to the public in the future. And so we have the two separate ones. Why this is good is that it actually allows a low-tech version, a low-tech option for your in-person meetings. And you can do a virtual and do everything with your virtual, and then you just have to integrate all that information and feedback from the virtual when you do your in-person. But you don't need a lot of technology for an in-person meeting. The combined is attractive because it's a one-off meeting, right? You can get both at the same time. It's much more of a dynamic interface. But candidly speaking, we are now examining the technology for that. And like there was when we first started this VPI during COVID, a bajillion platforms coming at you, GoToMeeting, Teams, Zoom, whatever, right? We're finding the same thing is coming at us for technology for hybrid. And we really want to be very strategic. And again, we're going to be motivated, but what's easier for the public to use, that's our first checklist criteria. And we'll figure that out. We have started a survey of all of our state locations using our local partners as help. We sent that out last week to understand what facilities they have that could actually support a combined hybrid meeting and what technology is available. And we'll be taking the results of that survey to actually examine again how we can do the technology. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Engage, but we'll be pulling all that data into the Engage tool so anyone can go to our website and see where in-person meetings have the type of technology they may be wanting to use. So I just want to close on the fact that our recommended approach is always encourage virtual attendance because it has the lowest bar for entry. And then when you start looking about in-person locations, you have to stay on top of CDC. We as public agents have to use proper PPE no matter what. Space limit, capacity, spacing of people is a moving target, but we have to be on top of it all. Always have overflow space planned and really rely on your partners to help you with not only with space identification, but local staffing. And that's all we have. And so I'm going to stop sharing. But again, this is available for folks to read in their pleasure when you're looking for something else to do. And Alex is here and Derek is here, so we're happy to answer any questions. And that's assuming I didn't go too far over.
Not at all. We have time for questions, and I'll get us started because thank you so much, Andrea and Derek, for your presentations. There's just so much to unpack there. I guess one clarifying question I have is, I definitely hear you loud and clear. It sounds like Massachusetts DOT, virtual is not going away. It sounds like hybrid is going to be your method of choice going forward, because as you said, even if you have an in-person meeting, you've decided that it's going to have a virtual component. My question is the reverse true? Are you also communicating that, if you're having virtual meetings and it's still going to have an in-person component as well?
We are still in the virtual guidance direction from the governor. So we have time and not much. We are finding that there are like sporadic cases, and this I'm sure our sibling states have experienced, particularly when you're not in metro areas. We have had few requests by localities to come in person. And so that is why we're ramping up our hybrid and making sure that our folks have all the proper CDC measures in place and are working with our local partners to make sure the choice of the facility is safe and can accommodate people. We have developed flyers now that we're not releasing because, again, we're telling people we're doing virtual meetings that actually have a hybrid flyer that says virtual will be at this time, hybrid will be at this time, but we prefer you to go virtually. We would like our consultants and project managers to work with our local partners to survey localities so we can find out how many people actually are going to come in person. And then we can actually plan and identify a space safer and that's more suitable for that expected population. So there's a number of different pieces that are in play in trying to get to that world. But we really would prefer to stay virtual right now just because of the variant, because of all the issues. And we have a great vaccination rate in Massachusetts, but we also had P-Town, right, where we had breakthrough cases. And so we're really hypersensitive about protecting the public and our own staff, of course, in terms of doing in-person meetings. So we're hoping that we have time. We've had to deal with one or two one-offs, but we are really pushing for virtual, but we have the ability to notice for both.
Sure. I thought that was such a great idea to survey your partner agencies and see what facilities are available. I think that's, as you were saying, a really strategic approach to, trying to figure out, where you could potentially hold different types of meetings and, where you might want to, or what type of hybrid meeting platform you might want to invest in. Another question I had is, and you sort of, I was getting ready to ask a question and then you already answered it. You had the slide that was showing, even though it's not finalized, your sort of guidelines to hybrid meetings. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on when it's appropriate to use a separate hybrid meeting approach and when it's appropriate to use a combined hybrid meeting approach.
Yeah, well, the combined hybrid meeting approach is going to be completely dependent upon the technology. You have to have the live interface. So we right now are exploring a number of different tools to do that. We have not settled on one, and all of our tools have to go through an accessibility review. And accessibility reviews are incredibly expensive, but that has been our priority. So we make sure everything we do goes through an accessibility review. So I think what's going to end up happening, Lana, is that the separate meetings will be the preferred option for a while until we get to a point where we have the technology. And since we're going to require that they use our platforms, fancy dancy tools coming in from like consultants have to still go through our accessibility review and have to allow us to have all that information collected for our own databases. So I think we have a little bit of work to do on that piece. Also, it's important to note, even though we're doing the survey, we're expecting once we map it out using the Engage tool, that there are going to be a lot of black holes all over the state map. We're not going to have physical locations. So this is just the first cut at that. And so we know this is going to take some time to identify suitable locations so that they're kind of like tributaries flowing into a river. We want people picking the port of entry yet, because we've got all the stuff we've got to feed into that river before we get to the port and people are launched on doing hybrids.
Yes, I know one of the earlier in-person peer exchanges that the VPI team did back in EDC 5 in Hawaii, the facility they ended up with, they didn't have an internet connection for a VPI peer exchange, and so they were using sort of Wi-Fi hotspots and things like that. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge. So I didn't want to hog the conversation. So I see a question from Desira about where you would be able to find the presentations. So we'll provide the presentation slides to all the participants, whether that be through an email, or we'll send you a link to, like a document site where you can download those. If that's in the short term. In the longer term, all these materials will be made available on the FHWA VPI website. But any other questions for Andrea or the MassDOT team?
Again, this is Desiree from the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments here in Central Connecticut. I wanted to thank you for responding to the question. As a follow-up question, I wanted to know, you talked a little bit about using Sharepoint as resources for your project managers and things like that. Could you speak a little bit more about, it was kind of quick, some of the resources that you have up there and what you share, because I think that's a great resource that you have.
It's a wonderful resource we have. We actually have an RFP out in the street right now to actually expand its capability and our ability to use it. It has the ability to integrate with Pima, which will make Pima a tool that we can now use as a state fully on our own, which is really going to be important. It has the ability to link to Engage. And Derek, if you could talk, I know you just went video off, but if you could talk a little bit about, we've used it for the safe routes to school, and the power of SharePoint is huge, which is why we've actually been focusing on that as our data integrator, our data manager. Derek?
Right. Yeah. I think just a point of clarification, I think you're referring to Salesforce, I believe.
What did I just say?
SharePoint, which
oh, sorry, Salesforce. It's those S words. Yeah, sorry.
yes, different
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, we use SharePoint, but for like more storage, Salesforce we're using to integrate a lot of the data that we receive and things like that. And so Andrea mentioned that we have a Safe Routes to School program at MassDOT. We don't use Salesforce for public engagement on that, but we have used it to create some sort of dashboard that displays a lot of data that we get through the program on partner schools and activities that they've been involved in. So it's sort of a template for us to build on and use for public engagement activities. And eventually we want to be able to use something similar to show sort of public facing what types of comments we've received on different projects and how we're responding to those comments. So I can probably share that dashboard in the chat. I don't want to confuse folks because it is separate from public engagement activities, but it is nonetheless a template. So just keep that in mind if you're reviewing it. But like Andrea mentioned, we're thinking about Salesforce as sort of an umbrella to house things like Pima, and I shouldn't say Salesforce specifically because there's an RFP out and there might be other similar types of software, but the idea is to centralize all of the public feedback all in one place, as well as other sort of information like points of contact and mailing lists, basically to have a central kind of database for all public engagement data received on projects and folks involved in the process. So and Pima of course plays into that and is an important part as one tool that we use to solicit public feedback and respond to it. So that's sort of a high level look at where we're trying to get. Not too privy to some of the specifics, but happy to elaborate on that. I think our IT folks might be able to better speak to that as well, but that's my understanding of sort of the direction we're heading in as an agency with regard to storing public data.
And we think actually from the point of view of institutionalizing an approach, having a centralized database that is flexible and can address things like, Pima, or even become more dashboard-like for us is critical for institutionalizing the approach. And that's why we're advancing as much work as we can on that as fast as possible.
So in the last minute here, before we switch over to Toby for the New Hampshire DOT discussion, Andrea or Derek or Alex, do you have any advice or what is your strategy for staying on top of the constantly evolving new technology and platforms? Andrea, you mentioned that a little bit as something that you're very well aware of.
It's not easy. And I'll have both of these guys weigh in as well. We actually put materials together on the Learning Hub, and we have one tool, which is called the VPI 200 series Platforms, Tools, and Techniques that Alex actually created. And I'll have him talk about it. Look at, although change is constant, humans have a hard time with change. And we are constantly, I mean, everything we have is like, and for you guys as well, everything we do is subject to change. So you have to go back and make sure that whatever you're using is up to date. When we use the Learning Hub, if there's a change, it sends a notification out to everybody that the materials have been updated. They have to go back. If there's something that we know we have to do faster, we send it out through the VPI email. So we have a way of being a little bit more nimble and communicating with, this is a huge state and a huge organization. So we needed to develop those tools. And I do want to say, because I'll let these guys get the last word, please feel free to contact Derek and I. If you want any more information about the specifics, we're happy to help, or actually we're happy to get your ideas and feedback to what we're doing as well. So it's an open invitation to do not hesitate to email us directly if there's anything else you would like. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, I think you touched on some key points in there. I mean, a lot of it is obviously just going to be sort of keeping your ear to the happenings. So always being ready to, subscribing to Zoom update emails, for example, but also at the same time looking at the governor's orders and the CDC orders and balancing all of that. I will say the 200 series was definitely not an individual effort. It took a lot of different folks from different departments and consultants. And I think that was also a large part of it, just getting all those different opinions from all those different people. And then, as it rolls out, how the information is actually being applied, how useful it is from our producers, from our volunteers. And then lastly, just, I guess, not being too tied to the material is a large part of it as well. So, understanding that just the reality of the situation, these platforms are going to change. You're going to have to do lots of updates. So keeping your guidance general enough to apply to lots of different situations, but also, open to the changes that will come.
The only other thing I would add is that one thing that it was no minor lift to get Zoom licenses, because the state had the series of licenses that they were using, which were really great for internal meetings when we all went remote. And we were like, well, we have public meetings and we can't use complicated, platforms like GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar. And at that time, Teams wasn't very good. Teams has gotten a lot better. But we actually have a relationship with Zoom, and we actually meet with their developers. And we've actually, every time we get feedback from our producers on issues, we sit down with the developers of Zoom virtually and go through, like, we had this accessibility problem, we had this Zoom bombing issue, we had this, and they will either tell us how to solve it or they'll fix their platform so it happens. So we had a bunch of issues with Zoom bombing that were really bad, and they actually fixed the platform and we all updated new stuff. Same with Zoom Webinar. Zoom Webinar is amazingly easy to use for interpreters. It's just seamless to use it for interpreters. There's less problems. So that's how we ended up getting webinar licenses, because it was much better for our hearings. So I think that connection with the provider was incredibly important.
Well, thank you, Andrea, Derek, and Alex. I do see that Jeff has his hand raised. Jeff, I just ask you to kind of summarize your question in the chat pod so we don't lose track of it, and we can circle back around because, I think Andrea, Alex, and Derek, you'll still be here for the discussion we'll have later on, right? So great. At this time, then, if Toby, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm here. This is a great discussion here, and I'll definitely be able to get us back on track, because I have very little to share in comparison with Maine and Massachusetts. Those are very, very informative presentations, so thanks a lot for that. let me just share something here, if I can. Okay, is everybody seeing that NEPA public involvement manual?
Yes.
Page? Okay, great.
Although
So
if you could bump up the size a little bit, it may require a little bit more scrolling for you, but
fine.
perfect.
Is that
Thank you.
better?
Yes.
So in New Hampshire, it seems like every initiative that we implement is another responsibility on somebody that already has a job, because we're such a small state. And I know some of our local partners that are on this meeting can probably relate to that statement. And what ends up happening is that things move along a little bit slowly. And so it becomes a hobby rather than your everyday job. But I just wanted to highlight one of the things that we've done that has helped us to somewhat integrate virtual public involvement, and it revolves around our rewrite of the NEPA public involvement manual that I have shown here. An example of somebody doing this as a hobby is that we have a certified public supervisors program here in New Hampshire, and that's not important to VPI, but just how this was created. And as part of that, you have to do a project. The person that was in this training decided their project was going to be to write a NEPA public involvement manual, because in New Hampshire, our outreach was very sporadic, inconsistent in regards to public involvement. The timing of that happened to be right around with pre-pandemic, or right around the start of the pandemic. And we needed to figure out how we were going to still interact with the public without meeting in person. So as part of this manual, it was decided that we would include a virtual component to that. So I'm just going to scroll to the appendix here, or the table of contents. And in section 3 of this manual, we decided to include a little bit of a discussion on virtual public involvement, when to use it, how to use it, where to use it, and how this can impact the NEPA process. And so, we closely matched a lot of the information that was available from Federal Highway in here, and put it into context for New Hampshire. And I was going to scroll to, let me see here, just bear with me for a second. Okay, this is the section 3 of the manual. And, I'm just going to quickly scroll through here, not focusing on any one thing, but more to just show the highlights of what's in here. The why we would do it, how you get it approved, and then we get into all of the tools, very similar to the Federal Highway guidelines that's on the EDC 5 and EDC 6 site. And we talk about visualizations, ways to do that, do-it-yourself videos, etc. So this is more or less the extent, I would say, of what the DOT has done, New Hampshire DOT has done to formally integrate VPI into our project development process. The other thing I would like to talk about a little bit, and I'm going to stop sharing because it's pretty much what I had to share here. And hold on one second. All right. Is unlike what Andrea was saying in Massachusetts, in New Hampshire, pretty much all of our communities have requested that we go back to in-person meetings. Most of our state is very rural in nature. They like to meet face to face. There's all the local governments are select boards made up of 3 to 5 people. They are the decision makers for those towns. They meet, weekly, monthly, and it's always been in person. And they want to continue to meet in person. And so this has made it very challenging for us. And I'm glad that Andrea included the discussion on hybrid meetings in her presentation, because we've been struggling with the very same thing. We did see a pretty good uptick in attendees when we went to all virtual meetings, and especially like we saw an uptick in more of the 20 to 40-year-old crowd that we don't traditionally get at in-person meetings. And so our executive office thinks that, we should continue to bring a hybrid component to our public meetings, although it's not, like Massachusetts, it's not mandated that if you do an in-person meeting, you have to do a virtual component also, not yet anyways. And one of the reasons is because we really haven't figured out how to do it yet. We've gone back to in-person meetings. We've recorded some of those and we've posted those on our website. We tried, and if some of the regional planning commissions are on this call, they'll sympathize with this, is that as part of our project development process, we do a 10-year plan every 2 years. We refresh our 10-year plan. Part of that process is we do a lot of public hearings. The first public hearing was in front of our governor and council, well, the governor's council, and our executive office decided to try a hybrid meeting so that, anybody could attend and listen to, the latest on the 10-year plan. Well, it was somewhat of a disaster. It was not, the audio visual component of it was not really well done. It was very difficult to see people. It was difficult to hear people. And so I think that shed some light on, the challenges that are going to be associated with hybrid meetings, although there's still the desire to continue to explore that, which is good. And, I'm hoping that we can learn from, Maine, Massachusetts, and others around us about, how they end up overcoming these challenges to be able to access these hybrid meetings, whether it's we go to a facility, we tape the meeting, and then we show the meeting virtually, or vice versa. We do the virtual meeting, then we go to the public in person and listen to, more questions or comments, or it's all done at once, a one-off, which would be even better. So that is definitely one of the things that we're exploring in the near future on how to do that. Let's see. Lana, that's pretty much what I had planned to talk about. So I'm really, again, I'm very appreciative of all the material that's been shared. That's going to help New Hampshire tremendously as we look to move forward and better our VPI experience for everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Toby. So, your stakeholders and communities that want to get back to in-person meetings, do you think that's largely a, just like a cultural thing for your state, or is it a little bit of a technological barrier that people feel like it's just easier?
That's a great question. I think that the decision makers in a lot of the communities, it is cultural in nature. They tend to be the senior leaders of their community, and so they're more traditionalist as far as communication goes. When we did do virtual meetings, when we had no choice, we didn't seem to find that there was a technology barrier with hardly any of the participants, no matter what their background or technology experience was. There was a few glitches here and there, but by and large, it was pretty seamless. So I think it's more of that's what they know, that's what they like, that's what they want to go back to. I think some of them associate the virtual meetings with the pandemic. And now that they want to come out of the pandemic. They want to forget about all of those things that we did during the pandemic. So I think overcoming some of that and getting people to realize that these are really good tools, regardless of the situation that we're in, is the challenge.
Okay. So again, I would ask anybody with questions to raise your hand and unmute or to put them into the chat pod. I see that James, you put some information in there about hybrid meetings that your MPO is doing. Maybe if you could unmute and just provide a little bit more context or detail on that, and you've put a couple of links as well into the chat pod.
Sure, I'm in a public place, so I may have some background noise, and if it becomes a distraction, just interrupt me. But the information I shared in the text box was that from a procedure and policy standpoint, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission has started sharing recurring events on Eventbrite, and this is a proprietary web page. They don't charge for this service, but what's nice about it is it's linked. It's sort of an automated link with Facebook and Twitter, and so when we make an Eventbrite event that's recurring for our MPO meetings, in the example I gave in the text box, you can automatically set that up to share to your Facebook page, share to your Twitter account. And so, most DOTs or MPOs already have these kind of accounts set up. And so it's a very easy step to take to broaden your audience to people that would take an interest in this subject from any geography. But because of the way that algorithms work for Eventbrite, Facebook, and Twitter, they'll tend to cross either by interest or geography. And so we have very low participation rates at the Planning Commission anyways, but we've gone a whole year without a person coming to one of our public meetings before. But since we've implemented this, we've started having general audience from within our service area, our planning region, attending meetings. And so it's been, from that standpoint, in that measure, it's been hugely successful.
Great, thank you, James. So I kind of wanted to get to a question that Shana brought up. And first, I want to ask for my own clarification, make sure I understand. So this is a question about in-person quorums for public meetings. And so when you say that, this is not the sort of limit on the number of people that are allowed in a room at the moment in certain jurisdictions, but this is a requirement that you need to have a certain number of people attending from a certain public body. Am I correct in that, Shana?
So the governor had an executive order during the pandemic.
Shana, we seem to have lost your audio. Okay, so while Shana is fixing her microphone connection, so, and I'll just read out Shana's comment or question here. She wanted to address the ability to still meet remotely and what that looks like in Massachusetts now and in the future, because in New Hampshire, they have an in-person quorum. And so Shana was interested to hear what it's like in other states. And I think, Derek, you shared something. Lucy, I saw you pop in just briefly. I didn't know if you wanted to step in for Shana, if you kind of understood where she was headed. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Lucy.
Oh, sorry about that. Is that the local boards, the TAC or whatever, they have a requirement that to have a quorum of their organization, they have to be physically at the meeting. And they can't be, if they're remote, they can't be using that person to represent a quorum. So if you need, let's say your board needs a quorum of 5 people, you need 5 people physically there at the meeting to have a quorum, whatever that quorum number may be. So.
And that hasn't changed to allow, whatever number is required for the quorum. It hasn't changed to allow for, participation in a virtual environment. Okay, so that's very, very interesting. Oh, there you are.
Phone back on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So what I was trying to explain, I'm sorry, was that during the pandemic, the governor had an executive order which allowed us to meet purely remotely, but that has since lapsed. So now we have to physically, like she was just describing, we have to physically have the people that are voting in person. Anyone on remote is not able to vote. They're able to like talk and participate, but not able to vote. So I was just listening to Massachusetts presentation and how, you know, they're still pushing remote and hybrid, and we don't have the full ability to do that right now because of the governor's executive order lapsing. We physically have to have people come in, and then people can also be remote, but like I said, they can't vote. So I was just interested to hear what other states are doing, and like if they're thinking of changing legislation to allow like full remote participation in the future, or if they also have like executive orders right now that are allowing them to do this, but it's going to lapse. So I was just kind of curious what other states were doing.
Yep, so we're opening it up to, and I think Derek put some information in there, but definitely opening it up to anybody who wants to respond to that. Go ahead, Derek.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, in Massachusetts, we also had an executive order that suspended the in-person requirement, but that's been extended now till April 2022. There was about a week-long period where the executive order expired and the extension was not yet in place. So we actually did have to hold in-person meetings for about a week for our metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs. They had an in-person quorum with the rest of the body meeting remotely. And like I think Sue Wonderly mentioned in the chat from our IT department at MassDOT, a lot of them used the OWL software to do that. They're all currently meeting remotely right now fully, but they do have that. A lot of our MPOs have the OWL software, and that was used pretty effectively, as well as a few others that met sort of just using whatever sort of TV or screen they had in their boardroom, and then sort of using that as one like window on the Zoom call with the others participating remotely. So I don't know if we have any of our MPOs, but feel free to chime in to share your experience as well. But that was sort of a glimpse of what I think it'll look like after that provision goes back into place. I haven't heard anything about the legislature in Massachusetts instituting it fully, but you know, I'm not certainly not privy to a lot of those details, but you know, it's certainly possible that at some point we'll have that. But for now, we're planning on a return kind of in April of next year.
All right, excellent. I think you know, there's a lot of interest obviously in this concept of hybrid meeting approaches, and was it, maybe it was Derek again, or oh no, it was Susan, had said that MassDOT has an RFQ out to look at the different technology options for hybrid meetings. So just those things, and you know, we've just kind of been talking about that in a general sense, but for others in the room who maybe haven't given specific platforms for hybrid meetings a whole lot of thought, or what the challenges might be, you know, it might be helpful to actually articulate that. So what are the challenges that you experience that you're looking for the right platform or, you know, hardware to overcome when it comes to do hybrid meetings? Toby, do you want to start? Do you have some thoughts on this?
Sure. Yeah. I can tell you the challenges that we've had, at least, and it's mostly in regards to the just the production of, say, a one-off hybrid meeting, meaning that you're doing it live to the audience that's there, and you're doing it live to the audience that's there virtually. So, you know, having a video component that would focus on whoever is speaking, so that you can see, you know, the lips moving, and if they're speaking to a plan on the wall, which is, you know, the traditional way that we've done a lot of project development meetings, you know, you talk about the design and the impacts to the properties and that kind of thing. That's very challenging from a video standpoint for people that aren't in the room. Or if you're talking to a PowerPoint presentation or some other video presentation, that makes it easier for the people that are attending virtually, but it may not be quite as interactive for the people that are there physically. And then there's the audio component of the speaker needing to be mic'd, the people asking questions needing to be mic'd, the people answering the questions all need to be mic'd, and all of those things need to be produced by some group of people. And then you have people in the room that want to ask questions, people virtually that also want to ask questions, and how are those things managed so that everybody can hear the questions and hear the answers at the same time. So, those are just a few of the questions that I have on how we would end up doing this. And like I said, the one meeting that we've had so far was not very good. So we definitely need to get better before we roll out any kind of hybrid program.
Thank you, Toby. I think that's a great summary of some of the challenges, I think. So I see Scott's hand is raised. I don't know, Scott, if that's a question or a comment, but go ahead. And then I see a question from Jeff, so we'll address that next. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, Lana, just a kind of a comment, looking at the hybrid meetings, we're all in with the kind of the separate where we would do the on-demand that we're doing, but then go out and do a live meeting in person, but not combine the two. And, looking into that combined where you're out there, you're doing one meeting, you're live, you're streaming it. I just see too many things that could go wrong with that. And one of our criteria for why we would even go out, because we're going to do virtual all the way through. And there's certain criteria of why we may go out to supplement the on-demand virtual meeting with a live meeting. And one of those is low connectivity. So it would be pretty tough to go out to a place with low connectivity to do a hybrid meeting where we're streaming that through whatever system, and then just the multiple people you would need for that. So, we're all in with the two different types, but not combining them. Just see too many issues with that.
Yeah, great point, Scott, in terms of, what your community or the localities are able to support in terms of connectivity and staffing, as you were saying. Those also obviously have to factor into your decision or ability to whether or not to do hybrid meetings. And as Mascot was articulating the difference between at the same time hybrid meeting and a separate hybrid, in-person and virtual meeting. So, and Jeff, this is a great question. What are the accessibility issues related to hybrid meetings? So I think this is for me, this is a huge issue because you don't know, or you most likely wouldn't know unless you do a very comprehensive survey to figure out who's going to be attending. You most likely won't know what type of accessibility issues might be at play here, whether there may be somebody who is visually impaired or even just colorblind, and you have to be sensitive to the colors that you're using in any visual materials that you provide, whether it's somebody that's hearing impaired. So and to try and make sure that your accessibility accommodations work both for the people in person as well as those online, I think adds just an additional level of complexity. But I see hands going up, so I wanted to give others the opportunity to respond to this. So Toby, I think I saw your hand up first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with Scott on where he said they would go out to communities occasionally, or but not as their normal practice. Is that I don't know if he's heard from communities where they've requested in-person meetings as opposed to the full virtual meeting.
Yeah, I can answer that, Toby. And now that, well, of course, numbers now going up, but fairly recently, we've received some requests. And like I said, we've kind of come up with a guidance of how we're going to do that. But that's one thing we need to talk about is setting that criteria, but also really addressing that of looking at that. When we had one community that said we have low connectivity, but we want you to come out. And when we look on the website that actually shows the connectivity of broadband, it was all green or good. So they were just saying that, or they felt it wasn't good. So I think that is going to be an issue going forward. And I think we have the same type of situation of our select board members and folks as you do in New Hampshire of, I think we're going to have some of the old guard that, they want to see, I want to see someone. I want someone there. And I hate to say this, but another part of it is some people want to be at the live meeting to grandstand, and you can't do that on the virtual because you can make your comment, no one else is seeing that. So we have to work through that. I think that's going to be an important thing to work through and get around somehow.
Great, thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
All right, I see Susan Wonderly's hand is up.
Thanks, Lana. I just wanted to quickly address Jeff's question related to accessibility. It's one of my focuses at Mass DOT. And I think first I'll say a combined hybrid meeting, along with everyone else's comments, is going to be incredibly challenging to pull off. It is going to depend a lot on the technology. I think at Mass DOT, we've put a lot of effort into creating guidelines around accessible in-person meetings from, does the building have a wheelchair ramp? Does it have accessible restrooms, accessible parking lot? To what we've done using Zoom for virtual meetings and making sure that we have closed captioning and interpreters. Looking at a combined hybrid and having to pull all those things together, including, as Lana said, if you have an accessible accommodation request for somebody who's attending in person. So you need a translator in the room for the person who's physically going to be there, but then you might also have the need for an interpreter for someone who's online. So I think there are a lot of challenges out there that we haven't even identified yet.
I absolutely agree. Thank you, Susan. And Andrea, I see your hand is raised as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on how do you know? We actually, and this I meant to say this earlier, Lana, is that, and this is really where it'd be helpful from Federal Highway to get us more compliance, is we're actually requiring now 4 to 6 week advance notice for meetings so we can secure the proper support services for anyone who might attend. 2 weeks is woefully insufficient. You need to give it a minimum of 4. And when you go hybrid, you're going to need to do more because you're doing 2 separate meetings. So it's really, really important that the notice be very clear and out in advance and requesting what kind of services. And secondly, we have found that using the Engage tool, we can pretty much find the languages, but we're not stopping there. We're finding that even with as good as the technology is getting with closed captioning, CART is really valued, particularly by our interpreters, because when there's a CART reporter there, they can actually see what people are saying without accents, and they get it clear, and they can do their translations more efficiently for enhancing the communications with the public. We want to be at a place where we don't have to ask anybody what they need anymore. We want to just provide it. And that's expensive, but that's our goal and our mission right now, is to work to making all of our meetings accessible. And the other thing that you have to remember is that our population is getting older and our abilities are decreasing. So what some of the public might have been able to see really well last year or 2 years ago may not be able to see really well right now. And that's why the accessibility reviews of our materials are paramount. And again, our motivation around VPI was to make everything accessible and lower every barrier to entry. And that's been our approach. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. So I wanted to circle back around to Jeff McCullough, because toward the end of the questions and answer session after MassDOT's presentation, I think you had your hand raised. And I wanted to make sure that, we addressed your question if it wasn't the one you had earlier about accessibility. Okay, so Jeff, you said your questions were covered. In that case, again, any questions related to Toby's presentation or the MassDOT team's presentation or Scott's presentation earlier?
Hi, this is James Veo, and I just wanted to add, I know that it was mentioned about accessibility, and I think the implication was hearing and vision impaired individuals and the use of a CART, which is, proactively transcribing meetings and making them accessible. And I just want to note, something I've learned recently is that we have, through the FCC, we have something in New Hampshire called Relay New Hampshire, and I believe other states, Maine, Massachusetts, all other states have this because it's an FCC mandate. And Relay New Hampshire provides accommodations for the hearing and vision impaired, sign language, text translation, live captioning. And they'll do this for any meeting in which there is a communication technology component, where there's a request by a disabled or vision or hearing impaired individual to attend that meeting. And so it's kind of a tricky thing that if you want to proactively translate, it does not trigger the use of Relay New Hampshire. But if there's a person who needs a translation service or an accommodation, then this service is available free of charge. And so you can spend a lot of money providing this, or you can provide the information so that persons with the need for accommodations know where the services are available, so that we're not spending a lot of money on card, and we're directing people to using available free services.
Thanks for bringing that up, James. That's really interesting. I hadn't realized that. And, that's definitely an approach that we took. Well, maybe not the relay services, but an approach that we took for this peer exchange. If you recall the announcement that went out inviting people to register for the peer exchange, was, we had a little message that said, if you need accommodations, please let us know. And so I guess that gets to your point. If somebody requests an accommodation, then you can use these services. So that's really great. Thank you. I see a great comment from Nancy O'Connor, who said that she had learned recently, or was beginning to consider the time of meetings. So early morning meetings, like 8 or 8:30, almost impossible for people with advanced disabilities, such as folks in a wheelchair, to rely on getting home help to help them get ready in the morning, even to participate in an early morning meeting. And that's very interesting, Nancy. I guess I hadn't really given it a whole lot of thought, but considering my own grandfather, it takes him 5 minutes now to even get up out of the chair. So I can kind of see how that would be a very, a huge challenge. So UNH, the University of New Hampshire Institute on Disability, recommends 10 a.m. to be the earliest if you want to be fully inclusive and accessible. Thank you, Nancy, for that comment. Does anybody have any additional thoughts on that? Because I know that, in terms of timing of meetings, we often think about, whether people who are working are able to get to a meeting that you schedule. But, there may be other considerations when it comes to the timing of your meetings.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Lana. I guess I'll be interested to wonder, has anyone held an early morning meeting, a 10 a.m. meeting, or an all-day meeting?
I'm seeing Toby shaking his head. So maybe they tend to be in the evening.
Yeah.
Although, it may also depend on your demographic, if who you're trying to reach, and you may have, if you have the resources or the time or need in your community, you may have to have more than one meeting. I know in Maryland recently, they did have an all-day public meeting, and the next time around they learned from that experience and had too short of ones.
Sunday meeting.
Sorry, go ahead.
We did a Sunday meeting.
Sunday meeting.
Yeah, so I think maybe for older individuals who, or somebody who's retired, they might be able to make a mid-morning meeting, or maybe people who work a night shift. I don't know. Whereas other people, we're probably looking at something in the evening or on the weekends, as people are pointing out. So Andrea, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, it's still a challenge for us to get the versatility among our different project managers to do different types of meetings. But we have done Sunday meetings where, churches have asked us to go out, or communities on weekends that have specific functions. And so we love those, because particularly virtually, because we can actually do those a lot easier.
All right, excellent. And I see Nancy saying that their committee meetings are all early morning. James, you said that your MPO meetings are generally at 11:30, although looks like you've had generally poor community attendance. And Connie Reed, you said your community meetings generally start at 9:30, but they aren't specific project public meetings. They are open to the entire public. So I think it definitely looks like a different number of different approaches there, different meeting times that people use. And I guess, with Nancy's comment, maybe it's just a reminder that you might want to consider whether or not it's would be helpful to use a different time. So we are edging in on our time to take a break before the synthesis discussion later on. So we have a couple more minutes for any last questions or comments. Otherwise, I think we could, happily go to break and give you a couple extra minutes for break. All right, so I wanted to thank all our presenters again, and everyone for your engagement and great questions.